introduced 11,815 bills this year and passed just enough to keep the bison happy. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number, the podcast where we turn the chaos of Capitol Hill into something that makes some sense, at least. I'm Sarah, and today we're talking about Congress. Yes, Congress, 2025 Wrapped Edition. This year they introduced everything and passed, well, almost nothing.
No, almost nothing indeed. Again, welcome to another episode of Legislative Theatre, where the scripts are endless, the actors are questionable, and the plot twists are mostly ceremonial.
Yes, our mostly ceremonial Congress.
Yes, it really is. It really is.
Before we kick off today, let's talk a little bit about the UK and a little bit of your Wrapped, and maybe if you guys are also just as bad at wrapping presents in the form of past legislative packages as we are over here.
Well, no. And it is worth just reflecting on quite how dysfunctional the US Congress really is. Now, in a lot of ways, it's baked into the system. The system is designed so that you introduce a vast amount of legislation and you pass only a relatively small part of it. That's quite unusual. Most countries don't waste enormous amounts of time drafting legislation that's never going to pass. It doesn't seem a particularly effective use of people's time. But what it does do, there are advantages to it in that you can introduce bills that you don't think are going to pass, and some of them suddenly will pass because they'll pass on emotionally. You can do a lot of horse trading within the legislatures and things. So it's quite exciting, and it means things pass that otherwise wouldn't pass. In most countries, it's the government that controls how things are legislated, and certainly that's the way it works in the UK. So the government introduces all the bills. The government, therefore, has a majority, so it passes all the bills. They are very astute at disciplining the MPs to make sure the MPs vote the right way on bills. So sort of rebellions are quite rare and are punished quite harshly. So it does mean that even though relatively small amounts of legislation is introduced, it virtually all passes. If bills in the UK fail, that's a big deal. It's a big problem for the government. And the government at the moment is struggling to pass some of its real landmark legislation that it wants to pass, as it's obviously the first Labour government in many, many years. And so they're really desperate to pass their legislation. They're struggling basically because it's quite unpopular, but they'll still get it through. They'll get something through because you just don't have legislation that doesn't pass. But it does mean that the legislation is all serious, and you don't get the sort of rather frivolous bits of legislation that are introduced across the US.
Yeah, we have a lot of frivolous kind of staking stakes in the sand for the sake of stakes being in the sand here.
I mean, we've had occasions this year when legislators have said, oh yeah, no, I voted for that bill, but I didn't actually read it.
Right.
Perhaps that will become the norm. It's like, well, my AI read it and said it was okay.
Yeah, maybe they all have their own little AI bots that they program with their opinions and moral code. And there's the judger there. How could you read all of the bills when there was 11,815 of them proposed? That is so many bills. That's so much reading.
I mean, probably a good point at which to mention of the new tool that we've just introduced at Bill Track 50, which is Ask AI. And so now, if you're a Bill Track 50 subscriber, for any bill that's out there, you can ask a question and AI will read the bill for you and answer it. So exactly the kind of tool that busy Congress people need. They can't be bothered to read the bills.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. Definitely want to check that out. Okay, so with that 11,815 bills, essentially enough to wallpaper every room in the Capitol twice and still have some left over for the basement, let's get into what actually passed.
Yes, that would look quite nice, actually. I think they should try that, actually. Let's wallpaper the Capitol in failed dead bills. Okay, so nearly 12,000 bills, 276 of them today, at the time we're recording this, have actually been successful. Maybe a few more by the end. I think there's still a few days left to run on Congress. Okay. So roughly 2.3% of all the bills that were introduced. So if this were any other workplace, people would be asking for productivity plans, performance reviews, and maybe some stress balls. In Congress, though, it's just another day at the office.
Yeah.
We should, of course, point out at this point that the 119th Congress, which started in January this year, is a 2-year session. So bills don't actually have to be enacted this year. They have until December 2026 to pass. So some of these bills that we're talking about that haven't passed, they might still make it next year. But you would expect, I think, that any of the bills introduced in 2025, if they are going to be successful, you would have expected them to really have made it by now.
Okay, so some of the bills I'm still holding out hope for and pining over might not actually come.
Yes, that's right. They're not dead yet. Not dead yet.
Not dead yet. Here's the biggest kicker of it all. Of that 276 bills that did pass, 164 of them are essentially ceremonial confetti. And there's a lot of stuff that it's nice that we're acknowledging, but maybe that's not what we should be doing. And when I'm talking about these, I'm really talking about a lot of these kind of Senate resolutions that have passed, which those seem to be semi-easy because they're a little bit inconsequential, honestly. But we have Senate Resolution 19, which gives a nod to President Jimmy Carter. We have Senate Res 6, which offers the Senate's thanks for the Honorable Patty Murray, and Senate Resolution 130, which honors the life and legacy of Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. Basically, it's just Congress handing out certificates for good citizenship and people who do really care about the U.S. and have helped our lives here, which is great. We want to tell people thank you so much for helping us be a better country.
Absolutely.
We can't forget Senate Resolution 475, which officially declared November 1st, 2025 as National Bison Day, because nothing says legislative accomplishment quite as much as honoring that great American bison.
Yes, the bison, our furry, four-legged legislative champions. But really, the resolution dives into the history, conservation efforts, indigenous stewardship, and the economic role of bison. So it's actually quite an interesting little bit of legislation there. Over 87 tribes are involved in preservation, and as of 2022, nearly 200,000 bison are under private stewardship, which is interesting, isn't it? So while Congress isn't passing major policy, the bison are probably quite happy with the way this year's turned out.
Well, and as a Coloradan, I really do love the bison, so I was happy to see that.
It's definitely a high point of the year.
Some bills actually did have some teeth, we might say. So let's talk about this first bill, which I think is a thematic theme of the year that I think I'm also sick of hearing about. I'm not sure how you feel about this, but the Epstein Files Transparency Act, or HR 4405. Stephen, tell us what this bill does.
Well, I doubt there's anybody in the country who doesn't know what this bill does at this point. And in fact, most anybody in any other country as well. This bill has been enormous news in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure lots of other countries in the Western world, just as it has in America, really. So it's all about sunlight, but in a very heavy government documents kind of way.
Okay.
So the Epstein Files. We all know about the Epstein Files, this treasure trove of documents that apparently the government has been sitting on for years based on all the various investigations into Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe there's some bombshell revelations in there, maybe even something that touches on the president. We don't know, but this law requires the Attorney General to release all of these unclassified DOJ documents related to Jeffrey Epstein within 30 days. So that deadline is December 19th. Now, we're actually recording this on December 17th, and as of now, we haven't seen any of these documents. When you're watching this, maybe you have. Maybe the world's changed. Maybe everyone knows all about the secrets of Jeffrey Epstein by now. But somehow I doubt it. So the documents that are supposed to be released include investigative records, flight logs, communications, immunity agreements, even detention and death materials.
Okay. This is definitely what I've been hearing about. I've been seeing some photos getting released here and there. But yes, I think there's a huge question of whether we get to Friday and the U.S. invades another country for war, or we see the Epstein files. I think one of the main questions on a lot of people's mind here is, are there any redactions allowed?
Yes, there are, but they are very specific. This is a very carefully crafted piece of legislation. So they're allowed to redact personally identifiable victim info, child sex abuse material, ongoing investigations, graphic violence, and classified national security data. But nothing just because it's politically sensitive or embarrassing. And each redaction needs a justification published in the Federal Register and sent to Congress.
Okay.
Now, the fact that we haven't seen these files yet indicate there's probably quite a lot of this going on. So I suspect when we do see something on this, there'll probably quite a lot of anger, actually, and a lot of to and fro about, are they actually complying with the letter of this law? But it's also worth just noting from a legislative point of view, the fact that this bill was successful is quite remarkable. And the process that it happened and the eventual bipartisan nature of the votes on the bill really illustrates something about what can happen in Congress when public anger is sufficient.
Yes.
Legislators, for once, sat up, looked out at their constituents and said,
Yes.
we need to do something.
Yes, and this has been marred in controversy and drama all summer, honestly. The Speaker of the House refused to swear in a new House member because he didn't want to vote until, kind of Trump changed his tune and said, yes, let's release them. So I will be very interested to see what happens on Friday or maybe next week. Maybe I'll check for some docs in my stocking, but let's move on. So we've also had some bills that were aimed at veterans, like the Fairness for Service Members and Their Families Act of 2025.
Yes, that's right. So this one ensures life insurance coverage for service members and veterans keeps pace with inflation. So every 5 years, starting in 2026, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs will review CGLI and VGLI coverage against CPI changes. And now, I'm sure everybody understands what that means. Basically, CGLI and VGLI are life insurance policies for servicemen and veterans. Okay. CPI, of course, is a measure of inflation. So essentially, it prevents the real value of coverage from shrinking as prices rise.
Yes, I love the acronyms, especially when they end in I. Okay, let's get to one that's a little bit more contentious. We also had the Laken-Riley Act, and this is something that we did do a podcast on earlier this year. We've definitely done a blog about it. If you're interested, check it out on Bill Track 50. But this was named after a student that was tragically murdered and strengthens immigration enforcement. And we really talked about a lot of things around this year and really dove into this earlier. But what more is there here?
Yes, absolutely. So we did do a blog post and a podcast actually on this earlier in the year when it was up for a vote. So just to remind anybody who might not remember that episode though, the bill mandates detention for non-citizens charged with relatively minor crimes like theft or burglary, as well as some more serious crimes as well. And state attorneys general can even sue the federal government if enforcement failures harm their state financially, which adds a layer of accountability at the state level. It's quite a radical piece of legislation, and one that I think at the time we speculated people didn't genuinely understand what it meant. I think they just felt that it was generally a way of protecting people from all these immigrants who were coming over and sort of murdering and raping and things. But the impact has been, as we predicted in that, I looked into this a little bit, so that there have been lots of detentions on the basis of this law, which is placing a strain on law and immigration enforcement capacity, and has also triggered a slew of legal challenges on due process grounds, because remember, this is about being able to detain people when they are accused of a crime, not when they've actually been convicted of it.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of due process questions happening right now, especially as it relates to detaining immigrants or people perceived to be immigrants. And speaking of public attention, you also looked at the top 50 federal bills on Bill Track 50, and these are measured by how many people have read them. We're going to do a state level bill a little bit later at the beginning of the year, but one of the most read bills on Bill Track 50 this year was the Jeremy and Angel C. and Sergeant Brandon Mendoza Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act of 2025.
Yes, that's right. So this one would have amended immigration law to make non-citizens convicted of DUIs inadmissible or deportable, regardless of whether the offence is a misdemeanor or felony. So it's focused on impaired driving, expanding the grounds for deportation, basically keeping DUI offenders off the streets legally and administratively, as long as they are immigrants. If they're not immigrants, that's fine. So this one has crossed over to the Senate, but appears to be stalled.
Yeah, this is an interesting bill. I do feel like we're seeing more and more DUI-related legislation and stuff passed, especially on state levels. They don't really seem to be trying to crack down on this, but it's interesting that federally they can only agree that only immigrants shouldn't be driving drunk.
Yeah.
Thinking about more dramatic legislation, we also had the Life at Conception Act, or H.R. 722, which this is a ginormous cultural flashpoint.
Oh, absolutely, yes. So it declares that human life, legally protected under the Constitution, of course, begins at fertilization. Again, this is a bill that we've spoken about in the past and has been debated over many, many years, really. But it's a particularly pointed debate with Roe having been overturned. So human person and human being are defined to include embryos and fetuses. So interestingly, it explicitly says that it cannot be used to prosecute women for abortion, which is likely meant to avoid legal blowback while still creating broad protections for unborn life across all US jurisdictions, including DC and territories. So that caveat wasn't enough, though. The bill does appear to be stalled in committee, as has happened in previous years.
Yep. Okay, another incredibly hot button issue, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act of 2025. This is another one that we've been seeing year over year. We also spent an episode talking about this year, but give us an overview.
Yes. Another bill touching on one of those things that has just been a topic of conversation. Countries around the world, particularly in the UK as well this year, and one where it's really hard to find a pathway that feels just to everybody concerned. So the bill itself amends Title IX to prohibit individuals assigned male at birth from participating in female sports programs. Males can still train or practice with women's teams, but cannot take roster spots, scholarships, or competition opportunities. So yet another bill that managed to get out of the House, but doesn't seem to have any legs in the Senate.
Yeah, I do wonder if this will also come up with the Olympics happening in a couple months. I feel like this discussion is really dominated by the summer games instead of the winter games.
Olympics?
Yeah, the Winter Olympics are in February.
Oh, right, Winter Olympics. Yeah, sorry, we don't consider them to be Olympics.
On the fiscal and regulatory side, one of our favorite things to talk about, obviously, here on Bill Track 50, but we had the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or as many Democrats call, the One Big Ugly Bill now. It's been quite the bill for this year. I remember writing the blog post about this and feeling incredibly overwhelmed at the length of the bill, and I think this is one of those bills that we were talking about earlier, where people voted for it and then realized afterwards that their vote maybe had some repercussions that they were not aware of.
Yes, you're certainly right about the length of this bill. It was absolutely enormous, so much so that it actually broke our AI, our poor AI that reads all the bills and summarizes them. Too big, it wouldn't have it. It wasn't having it. So if you do read the summary of this bill on Bill Track 50, it's the summary of the first part of the bill, not all of it. But it was a big legislative win for the Republicans, and of course howls of process from Democrats and anyone else who isn't keen on having to sell their kidneys to pay for healthcare. It is a massive omnibus bill there. People have focused on a few things in it, but actually it covers a wide range of things, from tax credits, energy policy, agriculture, defense, healthcare. They all get tweaks. It reduces green energy incentives, it promotes traditional energy sectors, it modifies crop insurance, it reallocates defense spending to things like missile defense and shipbuilding. It's obviously very conservative leaning. It's a restructuring with broad economic and regulatory implications. The impacts will actually play out over years, which is one of the reasons why I think people will keep talking about this on and on. And it could, of course, have a big part to play in the midterms next year and the next presidential election in 2028. So a significant piece of legislation this year.
Very significant. And we also had some pretty significant budget bills. The most significantly read and talked about one is the Rescissions Act of 2025.
Yes, absolutely. So this bill, again, you may remember us talking about it earlier in the year, it cancelled $6.9 billion in unobligated federal funds, mostly in foreign assistance and international programs. It also gutted public service broadcasting funding on the grounds that it was too woke. Some critical programs like HIV and AIDS and maternal health were finally exempted after Hauser process, but it was a big symbolic win for the America First philosophy to reallocate resources and reduce government spending. And it did set an important precedent that under pressure from the president, Congress would roll back spending that it itself had already approved.
Here we are. A new frontier. Well, the public certainly had a lot to say about that. There was a lot of uproar about PBS, but there was also bills that the public was very keen on looking at, like the Foreign Anti-Digital Piracy Act, or FADPA.
Yes. So certainly not one of the huge bills, like the One Big Beautiful Bill that we've been talking about, but still something that's very, very important to anybody who has an interest. And this bill would allow copyright holders to petition courts to block access to foreign websites websites primarily engaged in infringement. So courts issue blocking orders for ISPs with protections to prevent overreach and non-infringing content from being affected. So effectively, it's a copyright enforcement mechanism with international teeth, and that's really the importance of it, I think. It's notable for being the only purely Democratic bill on our top 50 list, reflecting perhaps the fact that given the Republican trifecta, they have both houses of Congress and the presidency, people have really realized this year that it's the Republican bills that were more likely to be passed, even if that likelihood was very small. Yeah. And maybe they were right, because this bill is stuck in committee, despite all the interest.
Okay, and then we also had voting issues, which is definitely something that the Republicans love to talk about. And this is a huge bill that has been championed by Republicans or something like this for many years, which was the SAVE Act, or the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility.
Our readers are very keen on this one, or maybe not. So the bill itself would amend the National Voter Registration Act to require proof of U.S. citizenship for federal election registration. This is the key difference here. They're not talking about ID when you turn up to vote. It's ID required to actually register to vote. And acceptable documents only include passports, real IDs, birth certificates, things like that. So a very sort of strict list of documents which people may not have. It includes affidavits, though, for those lacking immediate proof. It is aimed at preventing non-citizen registration, and it centralizes verification across federal agencies. So potentially hugely impactful on an already complicated US voting practices system. This is another one that cleared the House, but has disappeared without a trace in the legislative black hole that is the Senate.
There's a lot of black holes here. Okay, so then we had a truly wild one. I remember when you wrote about this bill, I didn't quite understand what was happening. And even while we recorded the podcast about it, I still feel like I didn't understand what was happening. But this is the NOSHA Act, which is an act that aims to abolish OSHA entirely.
Exactly. It repeals the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970 and dismantles OSHA entirely. So no more federal workplace safety inspections or regulations. Basically, hope everyone's careful out there. Try not to hit your thumb with your hammer, as you might expect. This is another bill that hasn't progressed this year.
But a crazy one, to say the least. And yes. Last but not least, we had the HALT Fentanyl Act.
Yes, absolutely. So bit more sensible here, designed to control fentanyl and its analogues by creating a class-wide scheduling approach, making trafficking easier to prosecute while streamlining legitimate research. The Attorney General gets expedited authority to regulate substances, and researchers get simplified registration processes. Big law enforcement tool while keeping science moving. And it sounds quite sensible, and wonders of wonders, it actually has been enacted. It's one of those few successes.
One that is not in the black hole. I am shocked. Okay. How did they manage to do it? Actually pass a bill. All right. So, standing back, what does this all add up to for 2025?
Well, let's just say it's a tale of contrasts. Congress introduced over 11,800 bills. The ceremony honored hundreds of people and causes and passed just a slim handful of policies that actually mattered. Attention outcomes rarely intersecting. Only 9 out of our top 50 red bills on Bill 50 have actually been enacted to date.
And it's also interesting because we do talk a lot about these really explosive bills getting introduced all of the time. We've talked a lot this year about the Overton window and how there's bills that are getting more and more crazy, and they're kind of shifting our perspectives. Some of these bills are getting passed, but it is interesting to look at this now at the end of the year and see that a lot of these bills that when they came out, and we were so surprised and hoping that they weren't going to get passed because they were just crazy, like the NOSHA Act.
Yep.
That is good, I guess, that they're not passing, because some of them are pretty crazy. But if anybody was expecting 2025 to be the year that Congress finally got its act together after the 2024 elections, better luck next time.
Yes, exactly. Gridlock, strategy, messaging over movement, take your picks. Most bills, most public hopes just floating somewhere in procedural limbo. And as you say, this is, perhaps people would have thought things might be different, given a more disciplined Republican Party based on the last Trump administration, and a sympathetic president, a sympathetic Supreme Court. you would have thought that perhaps Congress would have rolled its sleeves up and said, okay, finally, we're going to get some bills passed. And we're actually going to adopt this bipartisan strategy that's necessary to get them past the filibuster. But no, it absolutely hasn't been that. In fact, I mean, the really notable thing, of course, is this year legislation by executive order. President Trump has a staggering number of executive orders, and that's really how government is being done. And Congress has taken a back seat. Now, you might consider that a good thing or a bad thing, and that will depend on which end of the political spectrum you're at. But of course, what you should always remember is if a Republican president, a Republican administration does it now, in a few years' time, you might have the Democrats doing the same thing. So regardless of which party you're supporting, it is worth taking a step back and thinking, is this how you want the American government to actually work?
Yes, I was very happy when we came out with that new executive orders tool this year, when the onslaught of executive orders came down when Trump first took office, because I could not keep up. And people did stay engaged this year. They read, they tracked, they debated, and they really proved that public curiosity refuses to go extinct, even if our legislative action seems to be bordering on extinction.
Absolutely. And of course, let's just return to the highlight of the year, the bison got their day. Not the most earth-shattering policy, you might say, but you've got to respect a legislative win for America's shaggy national mammal.
I do love them. I do love them. But yes, Congress may have not moved mountains in 2025, but they did hand out certificates, pass a few important laws, and make the bison very happy.
Yes, if nothing else, it's proof that Capitol Hill is never boring, even if it's mostly ceremonial.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, that's the scoop for 2025. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and remember, someone somewhere is always celebrating a bison.
Moo! That's what bisons do, isn't it? Is that the noise they're getting? Anyway, let's go 2026. I'm sure there'll be even more legislative chaos then.
I'm not too sure, but we'll be here either way, and I know that we'll keep looking beyond that bill number. So have a great end of the year, everyone, and we'll catch you later.